Um, we were talking about concubines and slave girls.
Yes, the key verse in this regard is chapter number 4 and verse number 25.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is the key verse. It refutes the notion of concubinage. You know, because it says very clearly that believers are to marry those under their rightful authority. They are to have relations in marriage only. So those people who say that no, these are slave girls are, you know, they are concubines and you can have sex with them without marriage. This verse of the Quran refutes such people.
Yes. Well, I never believed that anyway. I've always understood it meant when you come across slave girls as part of war booty, um, you can have sex with them, but only if you marry them, and you can't have more than four. So I guess that was always quite clear to me. But obviously, for people who don't like Muslims and are afraid of Islam, they will obviously want to think the worst. Um, and I suppose a lot of people forget that it used to be a convention of war to take slaves. That was how it worked. That was the whole point of fighting
Yes.
wars.
Yeah, that is during the time of Quranic revelation, slavery was the norm, and the economy was dependent on slave labor. If
Mm.
you read the Quran carefully, then we do not find any orders or any exhortations in the Quran to make slaves. Rather, we find verses where
To be kind to
slave.
them and to release them.
Yes, the orders and the injunctions in the Quran are to release slaves from slavery, from bondage. That if you have slaves in society, then it is a charitable act. It is an act acceptable before God if you were to pay for their ransom and to release them from captivity. So the Quran is for abolition of slavery. It does not enjoin slavery. Why the Quran does that is also something which needs to be understood. Man-God relationship in Islam is that of a master to a slave. God is our master and we human beings are his slaves. We do not come under the slavery or servitude of any other man. For example, when Moses was sent to the Israelites, the Pharaoh had enslaved them. The Quran mentioned that, and the Quran uses the word abd for that slavery, that the Israelites were under the bondage of the Pharaoh. So Moses was commissioned, and Moses said to the Pharaoh that these are slaves of Allah. They are bondmen of Allah, so you should release them. This informs us that our relationship with God is that of a master to a slave.
Yes,
So,
um,
yeah.
um, I kind of get that. Neither the Bible nor the Quran explicitly forbids slavery. I mean, if you go back to the Torah, there are bits that say, yes, you can have slaves, but only under these rules, and you have to let them go after 7 years, and you have to allow them the possibility of manumission, and it's sort of, yes, you can keep him, but only if he wants to stay with you, and there are all sorts of rules like that. So this would suggest that slavery is tolerated, as prostitution must have been, because there was this verse that um, in the Quran, I think it's 434, that says, do not compel your slave girls into prostitution. And here were two ideas in one verse, the idea of prostitution and slavery. So my interpretation, I'm sure you disagree, would be that if slavery is legal and prostitution is legal for slave girls, then all the more should it be allowed for for free women to become prostitutes, because, you know, obviously a free woman would have more rights than a slave girl, and of course you mustn't force your slave girl to manumit themselves through prostitution, and it's only acceptable if you don't force them, which is what I think the verse says.
Actually, this is not correct. It is not correct to say that the Quran does not forbid slavery. The verse, chapter number 3, verse number 79, is very clear on this issue. It reads, I will read the Arabic and I will translate it. It reads, "Ma kana li basharin an yuti Allahul kitaba wal hukma wal nubuwa." It is not befitting for any human being to whom God has given the book, the wisdom, and the prophetic office. Summa yakula linnasi, then he should say to people, Kunu ibadan li min dunillah, that become my slaves other than slaves of Allah. This expression, Kunu ibadan li min dunillah, become my slaves, this is not permissible even for a prophet of God. Even a prophet, a messenger of God, cannot enslave other people. So the Quran is very clear. All human beings are slaves of Allah. All of us are to be under the authority of God and not of men. So this is explicitly written in the Quran. We should study it to
Yes,
this
I
effect.
mean, I suppose I just didn't feel that that was what it said to me, simply because, okay, it's just my view that slavery is an institution. So in the UK we have the Modern Slavery Act, which is suggesting that slavery exists even now, even though it is forbidden. And certainly prostitution is being practiced, even though it is forbidden. And because they are institutions, and by that I mean practices that pop up independently in all human societies, because it seems a good idea. It seems a good idea to marry, and if you're married, you don't want your spouse to have sex with anyone else. And, you know, and the whole idea of illegitimate children, if you don't marry before you have children. This is sort of common to all cultures, not just Muslims or Jews or Christians. It's common to other human societies who've never had any contact with the Abrahamic faiths. So my considered view really is that if it's an institution, it is better that the government regulates it rather than forbids it totally. I know in the West they make a big thing about banning slavery and that sort of thing, and, you know, having the American Civil War in order to abolish slavery. But I don't think that the Southerners in America feel that it was about that. They were just, I mean, what they feel is that it was an unfair conquest by the Yankees. Because they were an agricultural economy, they needed labor, and because the North was industrialized, they didn't want, they didn't care about the Southerners. So when the Southerners said, right, you don't like our slavery, we'll secede. And Lincoln said, no, you can't just leave, and we're going to fight you and kill you and stop you from leaving the Union. So to think that Lincoln, fought it to free black people is really a lie that I think increasingly a lot of Americans now feel must be true. That was what the Civil War was ostensibly about, and they said, oh, the people who wanted to free the slaves won, but it was really to kind of impose their way of life on the Southerners, who had a different way of life because they were not industrialized and they needed workers for their cotton fields and whatever. And also, I mean, the reason why we have, I think it's dated 2003, the Modern Slavery Act of the UK. So you get all this, this coming back, because people do sell themselves into slavery even now. These women who work as prostitutes, who come from Eastern Europe, perhaps, or other countries, they kind of really know what they're doing, but they thought they'd do it anyway. So, so it happens, it still happens, and of course these women don't have the protection of, being legal prostitutes, because if they complain about being ill-treated by their client or whoever runs their illegal brothel, they will be deported. So they don't even do that. And I suppose, I mean, I support brothel keeping being legal, because it just gives, these sex workers some protection. And I know a lot of people say, I don't care, I don't want, I don't even want these women to have protection, and therefore I don't care what happens to them, and if they get murdered and assaulted by their clients, I don't care, because they're trash. I mean, that's not my view. But it is interesting also that it is the feminists in the West who want to criminalise prostitution as well. I mean, they're trying to do it, by half measures, by saying it's legal for a woman to sell sex to a man, but it is illegal for a man to buy sex from a woman, which is, a blatant case of sex discrimination. But these feminists, they don't care. But I mean, that was why I thought it was, chapter 4, verse 34 was so interesting for me, because it's dealing with issues that are even now coming up in the West, about slavery and human trafficking
Right.
and prostitution.
The Quran does not uphold the institution of slavery. Let me make it, repeat what I've said earlier. Muslims are to free slaves. Muslims are supposed to free slaves. They are not to make more slaves. There are many injunctions in the Quran to this effect. Now, if, there are people trapped in this institution, it is exploitation. Such women are being exploited, and it is against God's will to exploit other people, other human beings. All human beings, irrespective of their background, irrespective of their gender, they are human beings. The Quran says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَمْنَا بَنِي Adam. Verily, we have honored the children of Adam. Every human child is worthy of dignity and respect, just on account of being a human child. This is the Quranic standard. So we are not allowed to exploit people in any way whatsoever. And if people are being exploited, for example, then measures should be taken to, to sort of save them, to rescue them from such a vicious environment. And whatever the measures they may be, they should be put into force. So Muslims are to free people from slavery. They are not supposed to enslave other people.
Don't the Arabs have a different interpretation of the Quran than you?
Not at all. I can cite many Arab Muslim scholars who have said exactly the same thing that I have said. In fact, my research is based on Islamic scholarship from some very prominent Arab Islamic scholars who are, who are mainstream in the Arab world right now. So I would urge people to, not understand things by a few Muslim extremist voices only.
Okay, well I'll tell you
As I said
where I
earlier,
got the
Islamic
idea.
scholarship.
Uh, about the Arabs, because I think in some parts they still have slaves. But anyway, whether they call them that or not, there was this video translated by Memory TV. You may know it. It's basically the Arab scholars talking about Islam, and with English subtitles. So there was this female Islamic scholar talking about slavery, and she was kind of, well I think I got quite a lot of ideas from her, and she was just saying to these Arab men with Filipino maids that, you know, these maids are not their slave girls, and they're not to have sex with them, because we know that there's a lot of, you know, scandalous behaviour of Arab men with Filipino maids who, you know.
Well, if some people do things which are against the Quran, then they are to blame. The Quran is not to blame. My position is very clear that Islamic law is represented by the Quran first and foremost. So if there is any behavior in any culture, any society done by Muslim men calling themselves Muslim, which violates the Quran, then that is their personal endeavor. It is not sanctioned by God Almighty.
Yes, yes, I understand, but I suppose, you know, the verses that you quoted, which you say are mean that slavery should be forbidden, they are not really as clear as, say, the verse that says you are not to fornicate, you are not to commit adultery, you are not to practice usury, you are not to lend or borrow money on the basis of interest. I mean, that verse against usury is very clear. I mean, you can't sort of say, oh, it could mean this, it could mean that, but certainly with the with chapter 4, verse 34, it seems to suggest that it's okay to have slave girls, and it's okay to make them work for their freedom as prostitutes. I don't think that verse can be denied, even though I know Muslims don't like the idea of that sort of thing. But I
Sorry, excuse me. I think chapter 4, verse 34 does not speak of that. Chapter 4, verse 34 is about husband and wife relations.
oh no, that's a wife beating one. I'm trying to remember what verse it was. That kind of you know the one I mean, don't you?
I think it's the one in chapter 24.
Yes. Okay, well, I'll
What?
find it out. I'll find out, because it's annoying me that I got it wrong. Yes, 434 is the wife beating verse. So, well, maybe we could talk about that.
Yeah, sure. What's your query regarding that particular one in chapter 24?
Chapter the wife beating verse is chapter 4, verse 34, isn't it? Something. It's all separate yourself. Admonish her, separate yourself from her, and if she does
Yeah.
it again, beat her.
Yes, this is the one interpretation of this verse. Would you like me to elaborate on this?
Yes, please. And the verse,
Okay,
the prostitute, the brothel is 24:33. Just to
right.
make things clearer. Yes.
Okay. Now, first of all, prostitution is not permissible because it involves sex outside of marriage, and that is clearly prohibited. If you see chapter 17, verse number 36, then that verse clearly says that "Wala taqrabu zina," do not even come near to zina or adultery and fornication. Do not even go near that. Innahu kana fahishatan wa sa'a sabila. Most surely it's an obscenity and an evil way. So that verse, particular verse, and many other verses, they prohibit sexual relationship outside of marriage, clearly.
I understand this point, but I suppose in my mind there are three kinds of sex. You have marriage sex, you have fornication sex, and you have prostitute sex. There's also gay sex, but we don't want to talk. There's no need to talk about that. So
Yeah,
I
the
think
word,
it helps us to kind of decide in what those what which category the any particular
yes.
relationship falls into. So obviously the marriage sex is fine, is encouraged and blessed by God, and the other kinds are not. And even if we're not blessed by, even if we were blessed by God, you know, no woman would willingly want to be a slave girl as a prostitute. So there's no need to even, you know, say anything against that. And I assume the slave girls who are prostitutes are you know, the unfortunate ones whose men have lost the war and have to somehow, I mean, they're captured and they have no choice. And 2433 says, well, don't force them. You know, make them do any other work if they don't want to be prostitutes, but don't force them into prostitution. And if you compel them, I think it also seems to be ambiguous about whether they are forgiven if they are compelled, or you are forgiven if you compel them. But anyway, we can now talk about the wife-beating verse, which I suppose will be more interesting.
Yeah, I'd rather comment on this verse because I've opened it up in my Quran right now.
Okay.
Yeah, you see, this particular verse, if you read it, you know, in Arabic originally, then it says, وَلَيَسْتَعْفِفَ الَّذِينَ لَا يَجِدُونَ نِكَاحًا حَتَّى يُغْنِيهُمُ اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ. Now, I'm reading the first clause. It says, let those who do not find the wherewithal for marriage, let them keep chaste until God enriches them from his bounty.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if somebody does not have the means to get married, then he is not permitted to go to prostitution. He should keep chaste. This is very clearly written in the first clause of the verse.
Yes, but it says, let them who find not the means for marriage abstain from, but you know, but a Muslim might say, well, obviously I don't want to marry the prostitute. But, you know, there's
No,
that brothel, those are the slave girls, they're not being compelled, so it's okay for me to seek them.
No, not at all. It says keep chaste. Keep yourself chaste. Do you see this word? Can you see the first clause?
Well, there are two, they're sort of, okay, yes. It does say keep chaste.
So if it says keep chaste, then that is very clear. You know, your prostitution is not permissible.
Okay. But then why does it say about not compelling your slave girls to prostitution? It does suggest that it's legal.
Right now the word that you are translating as prostitution in Arabic, it is al-bigha. Al-bigha. That word is from the root baghiya. Baghiya. And if you see the occurrence of that word elsewhere in the Quran, it does not mean prostitution.
What does it mean?
It means transgression and rebellion. The word, okay, now we have to see what does it say originally in Arabic. One should not read selective translations here and there.
No, but I'm looking at the corpusquran.com translation, and it has quite a few of them. It's got Arbery, Mohsin Khan, Muhammad Sarwar, Shakir, Yusuf Ali Pickthall, and
Now,
Sahih Internationals, and they seem to be saying the same thing to me.
You are looking at translations. What one needs to do is identify the word in Arabic, which has been translated as prostitution, okay, and see its occurrence in other passages of the Quran. How does the Quran use this word within its own inflection, within its own recurrence? Does two other passages of the Quran render the same word as prostitution? This is the question that needs to be explored before coming to the conclusion that here it speaks of prostitution. So what I would like to identify to you here is that in this particular verse, it says, وَلَا تُكْرِهُ فَتِيَاتِكُمْ عَلَى الْبِغَاءِ, and do not force your young girls to al-bigha. Al-bigha is from baghiya. from bagawa. This is a very common word. It simply means rebellion, transgression of God's law. It is not specific to prostitution. Okay,
Okay,
so
but it must mean don't
let-
compel them to fornicate.
in what way? No, not specifically fornicate. Let me tell you how it applies. There are men, there are married men who use their wives to curry favor from other influential men. Have you come across such cases?
Yes.
Okay, this is about that.
I
Don't
don't
use your...
understand, but yeah, you're saying
Yes.
don't make your wives curry favor from powerful men on my behalf.
Don't transgress, do not make them transgress God's law. Okay, if they desire to remain chaste. Don't wait for your daughter to go and befriend, become friendly and flirtatious with somebody just so that you can take advantage of the situation. It is not specifically about prostitution. Why? Because the word over there is not prostitution.
Okay,
It
but
is
okay, so
al-bigha.
maybe it doesn't mean.
That's a
Okay,
different.
so what does
The word
prostitution
itself
mean
has been used.
in classical Arabic? What is that word?
Well, that we would have to look up. You have to look up the lexicons
Okay,
to know
well, I
that.
think that's a good question that I
If
asked.
you want me to do that,
Okay. Can you do that?
yes.
While on
But we need to understand the methodology of Quranic learning.
yes,
We should not.
yes, I know you
Okay,
know.
now should not rely on just translations of.
Okay,
We
so
should
you're
look
saying
at
it
the
doesn't
Arabic
mean
word
prostitution?
and all the passages under that word. Sorry?
No, I wasn't saying anything. You're breaking up a bit, which is a bit
Okay.
annoying. That we can't get
Okay.
a good line. But okay, we can leave it for that. For another time, and you can look up the classical Arabic for prostitution to see if it means, they use the same word or not. But we can talk about stoning, can't we?
Sure. Yes, stoning is not a punishment prescribed in the Quran for any offense whatsoever.
Yes, I keep telling
God,
people,
yes,
but they don't
God
believe
does
me.
not. Well, we have to show them the Quran and we have to question them. Show me in the Quran where is such written. The punishment for fornication and adultery, if done publicly in front of 4 witnesses, is 100 lashes, flogging.
Mm.
Okay,
Okay,
it
so
is
then,
not
unless you're absolutely sure.
chapter number 24.
Verse 2.
Sorry.
Verse 2.
Yeah, that is for if somebody has done that publicly, there are 4 witnesses there. If then the accuser gets lashes.
Yes.
If you read the same verse.
Yes. You know what? I think maybe we should end this call because we've just done prostitution and slavery, and then because it's such a bad line, maybe call each other so we have a fresh kind of subject for our next call. What do you think? Because you're breaking up a bit, so I think.
Sure.
Okay, so we'll end this call,
Okay.
and then I'll give you another call for the stoning thing. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Take care.
Okay, and I'll call you again in a minute. So we were saying in our last chat that the Quran does not mention stoning as a punishment for anything at all, and you were going to say a bit more.
Yeah, that is correct. There's no stoning to death. The punishment is not mentioned in the Quran for any offense whatsoever. For adultery and fornication, if done publicly, then chapter number 24, verse number 2 stipulates 100 lashes. And the next verse after that, it says that an adulterer will marry only an adulteress. So assume that if adulterer married women, men and women were to be stoned to death, then the verse number 24, verse number 3, it says that married women will marry only adulterers as married when adulteresses will marry only adulterers. If they have been killed, then how can they get married? So this
Yeah, I
does
think
not
it's
fit.
usually translated as fornicating men should only marry fornicating women. They're not allowed to marry virgins because um, you.
Right now, the word zina, Arabic word zina, if you read the meaning of this word as well as the commentaries, it refers to both married as well as unmarried men.
So it just
It's
means
not,
extramarital sex.
yes,
Okay.
it's not linked to just fornication. It covers adultery as well. And if you notice the verse which we were discussing previously, chapter 4, verse number 24. If
Mm-hmm.
you see chapter 4, verse number 24 and 25,
Mm-hmm.
that particular verse says that if a woman from Malakat Aiman category, from those whom your right hands possess, if a woman from that category commits obscenity, then for her is half the punishment for married women. So we can conceive half of 100 lashes, 50 lashes, but we cannot conceive half of death. So that verse also refutes this view that for adultery, death is the stipulated punishment under Islamic law. In the Quran, it does not stipulate that. The Quran very clearly says that if done publicly, first of all, you need to have witnesses. If that is proven, then the punishment is 100 lashes. It is not death. And same is the case with the homosexuality. The Quran does not stipulate the death penalty for homosexuality. Chapter 4, verse number, I think, 16, 17, 18,
Mm-hmm.
they discuss it says that punish them both, but it does not mention the exact nature of the punishment. And the verse preceding that verse says that if the homosexuals, if they repent and amend, then God is forgiving. If they have been killed, then obviously there is no room for repentance and
No.
so the Quran does not. You see, we need to understand that Islam is represented by the Quran. Prophet Muhammad is represented by the Quran. We need to understand this. It's a very important thing, and all subordinated traditions, all secondary sources, jurisprudence, whatsoever, it has to be kept subordinate to the Quran. First and
Yes. Yes. But I get the impression that a lot of Muslims prefer the Hadith.
that is a debate. There are many views regarding that. There are scholars who say that the hadith should be kept subordinate to the Quran. There are some scholars who are very insisting on hadith. So that is a sort of a diversity within Islamic scholarship.
Yes, but
And
I
one,
suppose as a matter of logic, if the Quran is indeed the word of God transcribed, then it must have more authority because I suppose in academia they talk about a primary source and a secondary source. So the primary source of the word of God must be the Quran, and the Hadith is only a secondary source of.
yes,
Yeah,
that
so
is
so I
correct.
mean it's just a matter of logic. That's what I'm trying to say, and I.
That is correct. That is also, it is not only correct, it is also a mainstream Islamic view
Yes.
that the hadiths are secondary sources. Primary source is the Quran.
Yes, and but I have a book on the Quran. Well, it's another edition of the Quran, and then you go to chapter 24, verse 2, and then it says stoning. I mean, it's actually in English. I mean, it's printed in the West and everything. And then it mentioned the Hadith, and I looked it up, this sort of this Hadith, and the story was that this hadith was eaten by a goat. You may be familiar with that story.
Yeah, these are apocrypha. You see, these are apocryphal narrations. The books of hadith are compiled. They were compiled by human beings, and Muslim scholars, they acknowledge that the entire corpus of hadith is not inerrant. There are apocryphal stories within them. There are authentic within them, and there is an entire a science that they have devoted to sift out the right from the wrong, and it is still an ongoing process. There is still an ongoing debate within Islamic scholarship
Yeah.
as to the authenticity of hadith.
I suppose it seems to me so simple just to say that hadith that are in harmony with the Quran are obviously authentic, and the ones that go against the Quran are inauthentic and unreliable. And so if the Quran doesn't say anything about stoning anyone to death, then the hadith that says stone adulterers to death is obviously wrong. Although I know this idea comes from the Old Testament.
Yes, that is very true. It's actually in the book of Leviticus.
Yes.
And the Quran, the Quran is not just silent about the issue. It also gives evidence against the process. There is evidence against the thing. So
yes, 18 lashes for people who falsely accuse chaste women of adultery.
Definitely, and this is the type of a character that a Muslim is supposed to have. You are not supposed to call women names. It's a serious sin in the sight of God if you accuse somebody that in nowadays, in drawing rooms and parlors, people they use all sorts of vocabulary about women without even knowing her character. So it's a very serious sin in the sight of God that if
That will
somebody
come under backbiting.
It does that. And also, if you say that a certain woman is unchaste, then you better produce witnesses.
Yes, because it's slander. In English law, it's slander.
Yes, that's true. And you get 80 lashes if you do that.
Yes. Yes, so I guess, I mean, that's what I like about the Quran, in that it protects people from, there are rules of evidence, so you can't go around saying, whoever is all these bad things without it coming back to punish you. And I thought, reading a little bit about the Torah, there are quite a few similarities. With the Quran? Wouldn't you agree? Except that I think the Quran is obviously more tolerant and liberal in many ways because its punishments are less harsh.
Actually, Muslims do not consider the extant versions of the Torah to be the real Torah, to be the original Torah that God gave to his prophets.
Yes, I suppose, or you'd be Jews.
And there is internal evidence within the Old Testament itself, within the first 5 books, which our Jewish brethren, they consider to be the Torah. There is internal evidence which proves to the contrary. For example, Moses writing his own obituary. There's many other evidences. They show that the extant Torah that is within Judaism is not the original Torah that God gave them. And same is the case with the New Testament. The New Testament is not the Injil that the Quran speaks of. The New Testament is a document that was codified by the Council of Nicaea, and it is a text which is originally available in Greek, in Koine Greek, whereas Jesus spoke Aramaic. And the language of Jesus and the language of the New Testament are two different things. The Muslims, when they say that we believe in the Torah, which the Quran speaks of, then they mean that they believe in the original revelation that God gave to Moses and to all the prophets. And when they say that we believe in the Injil, then that means that they believe in the original revelation that God gave to Jesus. But the extant versions that Jews and Christians have, Muslims would, say that these aren't the original autographs given by God Almighty.
Yes, yes, I understand. I mean, I was talking about the New Testament to someone, and then it just occurred to me that they only have the authority of the Hadith. You know, in that the Hadith is basically stories told by the companions of the Prophet about the things he used to do, and the New Testament is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John telling us, you know, what they felt and remembered about Jesus about, I think, 70 years later or something. So it's not exactly contemporaneous or particularly reliable, I guess, because there is a sort of famous cartoon of Jesus saying, "Now listen carefully, I don't want 4 different versions of what I've just told you," or I don't know if you know it, but I thought that was quite funny.
Yeah, actually, even Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John did not leave their autographs on these Gospels, and their authorship is also under dispute. Not by just Muslims, by even many non-Muslim scholars. They dispute the authorship of the 4 canonical Gospels. And also we need to understand that apart from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, there are many other Gospels as well, which are not accepted by the mainstream Christian
Yes, yes,
churches.
there were
But
12 disciples, and so there must have been 12 versions. It would have been interesting to get the version of Judas.
yes, and Thomas, there's the Gospel of
Yes, the
Thomas.
doubting Thomas, yes.
And there are many Gospels that did
And
not become,
Mary, Mary
yeah,
Magdalene.
Mary Magdalene, that's true. So these Gospels are called, there's a special word for it. They are called, I don't remember something, they call it Gnostic Gospels.
Oh, yes,
Gnostic Gospels.
yes.
So these Gospels are, there's a much debate about them that's currently going on. There's a lot more into it than what meets the eye.
Yes, yes. I suppose, you know, what I've been trying to kind of explain to people is that, I mean, obviously we can't all be Jews, even though we have to acknowledge that Jews were the first people to, you know, write about Adam and Eve and everything, and obviously Christianity and Islam was derived from Judaism. That,
Well,
so
the Muslim position is that God sent prophets to the Israelites, and their job was to share the message of God with all other nations. But what they did was that they made it a racial religion. You have to be a Jew to be accepted as such by other Jews. You are to be born into a Jewish household. Then God, sent other prophets, and his message was universal. It was to be for all mankind. But our
yes,
Jewish brethren, they've made the religion into a Jewish religion. They are good people among the Jews as well. We don't dismiss all of them, but there are some who are very racist and who act very elitist. So it is sad to see that, but there are also some good, very broad-minded people amongst the Jews. I have befriended some on Twitter. I deeply value their wisdom and insight on many things. And the same can be said with Christianity. There are good Christians as well. We shouldn't dismiss all of them.
no, no, I'm not really trying to say bad things about anyone at all. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that Islam is the most universal and most advanced version of the Abrahamic faiths. That's kind of what I'm trying to say, because obviously we can't all be Jews, and it's a very high maintenance religion, and I think a lot of Jews find it difficult to be all that observant, because they have so many restrictions and prohibitions, and it must be quite difficult for them. So I suppose what I'm trying to do is also to trace the history of Judaism and Christianity, because I mean I recently discovered that the ancient kingdom of Israel was in decline after King Solomon died. So it didn't really hang around for very long, and then it split up, and there was Upper Judea, and so it split into two kingdoms, and then the Romans kind of took over, and then kicked them out, and I suppose it just occurred to me about why the Jews became so divided, and my little theory is that they had a corrupt priesthood, the Sadducees, and they who were the elite, and who only cared about their privileges and their rights, and they didn't care about the common people, while the Pharisees did. So they were fighting, and I think the Maccabees, the two brothers, were fighting, and then Pompey the Great came along to try to settle it, and of course he took advantage of the situation, and then there was and then I think Herod the Great became the puppet of Rome. So it seems to me that the Jews themselves at the time, when they were in their own land, before they were kicked out by the Romans, they were not following their own rules. And because of that, everything went to pieces. But when they were wandering in Canaan for 40 years, they were, very together, and listened to Moses. And so, they basically defeated all the tribes who were living there, and took over their land. And once they had their own homeland, they kind of fought amongst themselves, which is, in a way, a kind of history of most countries, really. Once we're comfortable, we get lazy, and then we start, being rude about members of our own group. And I thought that Islam had a kind of logic to it, because it was saying no priesthood, because I know Islam has no priesthood. Like you have imams, but then they're just sort of people who head the mosque, run kind of like an elder under the Presbyterian system, and I suppose Muslims would assume that they would be living in a Muslim country, so there's no need for anybody to enforce the law. So you just do the prayers and go to your mosque, and that would be the kind of admin side of running the mosque, but nothing so much to do with wondering what the laws should be, because the laws should already be Islamic anyway. But anyway, the logic of Islam seems to me to be is theocracy, which is obeying the rules of the laws of God, and we were having a kind of disagreement about whether Islam is a theocracy, weren't we? I mean, I think it must be, but you seem to disagree.
Yeah, actually, there isn't a hierarchy in Islam. There isn't an ordained priesthood, or a set clergy, a pope, or some bishops, things like that. An imam is anybody can be an imam if he knows how to lead the prayers. I can be an imam. I have been an imam, when I lead the prayers for congregations.
Mm-hmm.
You can be an If you are a woman, you can lead the prayers for other women.
Mm-hmm.
So there isn't a ordained, job description that you have to be ordained and you are a consecrated member of the church. There is no hierarchy. The only difference is between knowledgeable Muslims and less knowledgeable Muslims.
Yes,
Somebody has more.
their knowledge, I mean, Muslim scholars and the ordinary Muslim. Yes, I understand that. So basically, in Judaism, before they were kicked out by the Romans, they had a priesthood. I mean, the drawings of what their priests would wear, so that definitely was the case. And I think Islam sort of gets it that priesthoods eventually become corrupt.
That is very true. That is very true.
Which is why it
And
says you have to follow God's laws and and just do that. Sharia.
that directly you have to follow, observe God directly. There are no middlemen between you and God.
Mm.
And we also need to understand Islam is not a sort of a remote political system to impose on other people. Islam is a lifestyle for your personal improvement. You practice Islam daily to become a better human being. That is why God has given us the Quran, that we become better human beings at an individual level. The rules of the Quran, they are universal. They apply on every situation. Whether you are a housewife or whether you are a head of state, the Quran applies on you. You have to do justice in the family. You have to do justice in the community. Wherever you are, the order of the Quran that exhort to justice, they become applicable. So, we have a very short lifestyle, Claire. Lifetime is very short for us. We are here for a very few years of our life. So we will die. So when we die, God is not going to ask us, did you rule this kingdom or that kingdom? Did you sort out the problems of the world? God is going to hold us to account of our own deeds. The life that we are living, the 24 hours in a day, that is what we are going to be held accountable for. So we should see the Quran as how does it apply to me?
Well, I
In the day.
mean, don't Muslims have a duty of jihad and the duty to enjoin good and forbid evil? It's a
Yes, they
religious
do, but
duty, isn't it? You don't just...
again,
It,
jihad, fighting, for
it's a
example,
struggle. I mean, it doesn't... I mean, I know there's also the concept of the greater jihad, which is the struggle with oneself.
But if we were to discuss jihad as fighting, physical fighting, then it is not a duty incumbent on the individual. It is the state that indulges in it, the community. An individual does not fight anybody. Individual does not have the right to take human life. Okay? It's the state that announces that, we are at war and people should come for self-defense and so on and so forth. It is the armies who do that in the battlefield. The individual does not do it. The individual has to apply the Quranic law. He has to perform the 5 daily prayers. He has to give the zakat. He has to be a good neighbor, a good husband, a good son, and,
What
improve
about
his status.
enjoining good and forbidding evil?
That I'm doing that with you right now. I'm enjoining the good things of the Quran and forbidding evil. That is something which
But
everybody
what if
has.
your government has evil laws? Don't you have a
That,
duty to jihad against your evil, oppressive government if it is evil and oppressive?
no, not at all. Not at all.
But
You
that was
don't.
what Muhammad himself did.
No, 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 no. He did not uproot the government. He did not have the revolt. We need to understand this, okay? And Islamic scholars have written about this very clearly. The methodology of Islam is not violence. Okay, we don't bring about a change through violence or through mob culture. You bring about a change through education and a change of heart.
Yes,
Yeah.
ideally, and I know that Muhammad preached for 10 years in Mecca until they kicked him out.
Yes, but then he formed a community in Medina, and that community then entered into a treaty with the Meccans called Hudaybiyah, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. The other day, when you asked me the question about did Muhammad invade Mecca, I understood it in the sense that as if he was a foreign invader. Let me put that in perspective. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, he was a resident of Mecca. He was a Meccan. He was driven out by virtue of persecution, and he went into Medina. And the Muslim community then, it congregated in Medina. It grew up in size. And then there was a treaty between them and Meccans in the last stages of the Prophet's life. They were supposed to come to Mecca for performing Hajj. Okay? If you read the whole thing, and then there was a treaty that there won't be any war, and the treaty was broken and whatnot. And then the Prophet entered into Mecca. There were some skirmishes, but eventually the Prophet's people were Meccans. A lot of them were Muhajirin. They were the ones who had done the emigration, and they were coming back. So it was a homecoming. It was not an invasion in that sense. And they lived peacefully with the Meccans. If somebody wished to embrace Islam, he was welcome. If somebody did not wish to embrace Islam, then Muslims were to coexist with them. So it's not that Muhammad was a militant conqueror as the way that people paint things.
He fought a few battles, though, didn't he?
All of those were either defensive battles or they were battles to liberate people. They were not aggressive acts. Let me be very clear. Okay, methodology of Islam is education. Okay, if Islam is to expand, then it is by education. Let me ask you a question. Did any Muslim army ever invade Indonesia?
No.
Indonesia happens to be the largest Muslim country in the world, the largest in terms of population. How is it that you have the largest Muslim country without a single Muslim military expedition sent to that country?
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. But then I don't think this country was Christianized by violence, but then I think what the Christians did when they first came to the West was sell the idea to the king, and the king liked it, and he basically did what he had to do to Christianize his subjects, which I'm sure were violent, but I suppose that's the nature of politics.
Yeah, but Muslims are not supposed to do that. Muslims are not supposed to use coercion and compel people to the faith.
But
We
the
are
jizya, you can't get round the jizya.
Well, let me tell you, if you see the verse about the jizya, have you got your Quran with you?
I can look it up online, but I know there was something about make them pay the jizya and until they feel truly humbled, or words to that effect.
Well, we need to see the context of that verse. That verse pertains to people who were living in the Islamic community, who were part of the Muslim, state, so to speak, and they had rebelled against the state. They had rebelled against the state. They were refusing to accept the writ of the state. The order was given to fight them so that they come back into submission and they accept the writ of the state. And they accept what God had prohibited, the things that God and His Messenger have prohibited. God and His Messenger have prohibited many things which are generic in nature, like do not do bloodshed, okay? Like do not exploit people. These people were doing bloodshed. So the order was given to fight these people so that they accept the writ of the state, they accept the rule of law, and they gave a token jizya, which is a token, a symbolic thing, which is a symbol to the effect that they have now accepted the rule of law. So this is what it was all about. This tax is not that, Muslims should impose a jizya on all non-Muslims everywhere they're living.
Well, only if they conquer them, which I kind of get, because imperialism is that is a nature of imperialism. You invade other countries. I mean, this was what, well, the Westerners did, and also what the Romans did. So,
No, actually, no. I would disagree with that. It's not something that Muslims impose when they conquer other lands. We need to see that verse in context. Okay, in chapter 9, the verse of the jizya. See the whole context of this
yeah,
verse to
I
understand.
can read you two versions of it, and it says, fight those who believe not in God and in the last day, and who do not forbid what God and his messenger have forbidden, and who follow not the religion of truth among those who were given the book, till they pay the jizya with a willing hand, being humbled. And this is the Abdul Halim translation, which is what I'm about to read to you. And it says, fight those of the people of the book who do not truly believe in God and the last day, who do not forbid what God and his messenger have forbidden, who do not behave according to the rule of justice, until they pay the tax and submit to it.
Yes, the context of this verse is about a group of people of the book that had rebelled against the state, who had rebelled against the state. It is not a generic rule for Christians, for Jews who are non-combatants, for example. And Muslim practice is not like this. Non-Muslims have been living alongside Muslims for centuries, even today. Are Muslims exacting jizya from them? Not at all. They
No,
are
no,
not
but I
doing
mean,
that.
it will come out of taxation anyway, and it's divisive. So that's why I'm suggesting that the jizya is something you would impose only on a country that you have invaded, and
Well, let me ask you this thing. Today, if you have, some place like, I don't know, the United Kingdom,
yes,
and some people say that we are going to take up arms against the central government, okay, and they will try to kill people. What would the government do? Would the government not send their armies to subdue these rebels, these armed
yes, of
militants?
course. But I suppose how I envisage the jizya working would be, say, the UK became Muslim, okay? Just say it's just say, and then it thought, well, we're going to export our Islamic revolution. We'll invade Ireland, and they invade Ireland, and then the British say to the Irish, well, you can pay us the jizya, or you can convert to Islam. Which is it? And then they can maybe do it to the French, and so on and so forth, and which I guess was how it was done. I think this was how the Romans did it anyway.
No, sorry, this was not done that way. The verse is specific to the people of the book who had rebelled against God and his messenger. God and his messenger, the term you need to understand that Prophet Muhammad was not just a religious prophet, he was also the head of the state. The Quran uses the term God and his messenger to describe the central ruler of the state, the head of the state itself. These people were warring against God and his messenger. So when you take up arms, when you become rebellions, when you try and kill innocent people, when you do bloodshed, then the state has a duty
Yes, of
to
course, to suppress rebellion. But I guess in the time of Muhammad, well, Islam was the new kid in town, while Judaism, Jews are saying, well, we've been around for ages, and the Christians say, yeah, and we were here before you, Muslims. So there's bound to be a bit of conflict because they, even now there is, because the Jews are saying, oh, we're the original and the best, and we're still around after all these horrible civilizations try to exterminate and murder us, and so on and so forth, and Christianity is also, I mean, obviously it feels threatened by Islam, whether we like it or not, it's sort of, Christians sort of notice that Islam is an emerging religion and Christianity is kind of losing support. So there must be some idea of competition and rivalry amongst these religions. I mean, Christianity with Muslims more, because, you know, I guess Jews were saying, well, we're just a little tribe, you know, we don't, you know, want to invade anybody, really. We just want to be allowed to live in Israel in peace, and, you know, so please leave us alone, and that kind of thing. Well, Christianity, you know, obviously was the religion of the West, Western imperialists. So obviously, you know, with Muslim terrorism and everything, obviously they feel a bit nervous about it. You know, plus immigration. So, you know, it's inevitable whether or not, you know, the scripture says it or not. So I guess, you know, we can understand where, you know, why you know, Islamophobia is now kind of on the minds of so many people, because they do feel threatened.
Again, you know, we need to distinguish people. We can't pigeonhole them all. We can't say Christians in a, you know, generic way that all Christians do this or all
Oh,
Muslims
no,
do
no,
that.
no. But generally
So
speaking.
yes, generally we are speaking generally. Islam is not a threat to anybody. It is here just to improve you, to make you into a better human being. Okay, it's here to establish a link between you and God, and for you to contribute to the well-being of human beings who are around you, the well-being of the environment that is around you, and you know, become a good human being and a good person. That's what Islam is all about. It's not,
Yes, I
yeah.
understand. And not, but I suppose, you know, the appeal of Islam to me is that, you know, it doesn't pretend to be, you know, it just says, well, if you want to be good people, your government has to follow the laws that God has prescribed in the Quran. It seems a logical thing to do, and, you know, we've already prescribed you all the punishments in great clear detail. So,
Yeah,
and
that,
that
but
is
that,
a theocracy. And that's
no,
what
that,
Iran is. And you know,
no.
they're not ashamed of it and say, oh, we're not really a theocracy. I mean, they obviously are, because they follow the
Again,
Quran.
I think, you know, if this applies, the Quranic law at a state level applies in places where Muslims have jurisdiction. Okay, it does not apply, like, for example, living in Britain. You don't go about flogging people in Britain.
No,
Okay,
no,
the
no,
worst.
because you'd be done for assault. And the Jews have the same reasons as well. The diaspora Jews, who say, well, obviously we can't go around exterminating the Amalekites because, you know, we'll just get done for murder, and that kind of thing. But they have this idea of the Noahide laws, which is the, you know, the seven Noahide laws, and they were saying, it's this concept of the righteous Gentile. I can look up what they are now, but it was just saying that there's a kind of minimum standard of morality that Gentiles should follow, and then the Jews will leave them alone. So it's really the seven laws of Noah, and I'll read them out to you. So it says, do not profane God's oneness in any way. So it's kind of saying you have to worship God in a way. It says, acknowledge that there is a single God who cares about what we are doing and desires what we take care of, that we take care of his world. Um, Number 2, do not curse your Creator. No matter how angry you may be, do not take it out verbally against your Creator. Number 3, do not murder. The value of human life cannot be measured. To destroy a single human life is to destroy the entire world, because for that person the world has ceased to exist. It follows that by sustaining a single human life, you are sustaining an entire universe. That has echoes of the Quran. This is from Shabbat.org. Number 4, do not eat a limb of a living animal. Respect the life of all God's creatures. As intelligent beings, we have a duty not to cause undue pain to other creatures. Number 5, do not steal. Whatever benefits you receive in this world, make sure that none of them are at the unfair expense of someone else. Number 6, harness and channel the human libido. Incest, adultery, rape, and homosexual relations are forbidden. It doesn't mention fornication for some reason. The family unit is the foundation of human society. Sexuality is the fountain of life, and so nothing is more holy than the sexual act. So too, when abused, nothing can be more debasing and destructive to the human being. And finally, number 7, establish courts of law and ensure justice in our world. With every small act of justice, we are restoring harmony to our world, synchronizing it with a supernatural order, supernal order. That is why we must keep the laws established by our government for the country's stability and harmony. So that's it.
Yeah, there are, differences between religions, but there are also commonalities. And we should see the problems that mankind is facing and look at the commonalities between us and making those commonalities as a base.
Mm-hmm.
We should strive to work towards alleviating the problems that our cultures and communities are facing. Jews have got things that are common with the Muslims. Christians have got things that are common with the Muslims. So yes, we can work on those commonalities and work for the common good. This is the need of the hour. We should do that. We should not flame the fires of conflict. People should come together for the common good. That is very important.
Yes, and we should be allowed to, discuss controversial things, even though it might upset people. And what I found disturbing about these no-hide laws is that I think, well, I don't think the West, kind of obey it, because it's a minimum standard. These laws are for everyone. They say everyone, if they're being good, I mean, they kind of accept that not everybody can be Jews, but if we're Gentile, then these are the things that our governments should at least be doing or have laws for or against, these things. So,
Right.
I think we're kind of a bit far away from that in the West anyway.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I guess we've been talking a while, and this time with a much better line, and it's been very interesting. I hope we can do it again.
Sure, anytime. You're welcome to get in touch with me, and it was a pleasure speaking with you. You can speak your mind. You can feel free to ask questions or even to criticize. I don't mind it at all. And, you're always welcome to get in touch.
Thank you very much for your time, and I think it's a privilege to speak to someone as scholarly and learned as you, because it always helps to know somebody who does actually understand the classical Arabic and can highlight the words in a different way. And you said you would look up the classical Arabic for prostitution. Did you say you would? Is it possible to do that?
Yes, certainly it is. And I will also highlight the Quranic inflection of the word al-bigha. Al-bigha, what it means.
What word was it in English?
The word which is translated as prostitution
okay,
in your
okay. Yes.
Arabic, the original Arabic word. I'll give you a detailed commentary on that.
Okay, that's for next time. Thank you very much, Kashif.
Thank you. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
أشهد أن لا